most important pressing issues on the African continent. And this time around, we'll be taking a look at the Horn of Africa, where a diplomatic relationship that barely existed a year ago is now raising serious eyebrows across the continent, the Middle East, and even maybe beyond. Somaliland. I'm sure you've heard about them, the self-declared republic that broke away from Somalia in 1991, has been thrusted into, I think, a geopolitical spotlight. This after Israel became the first country to formally recognize its independence. I think it was sometime late last year. And since then, there's been high-level visits and serious growing security cooperation and talks of deeper economic ties between the two countries. And that has fueled serious speculation about where that relationship is headed. And earlier this week, Somaliland's defense minister denied reports that Israel is planning to establish a military base in Somaliland territory, but he confirmed that Israel is helping train Somaliland's police and military forces. The developments have sparked serious conversations, serious debates about regional security, recognition politics, who gets to recognize who, and whether Somaliland is becoming a key strategic partner for Israel in a very critical region on the African continent, the Horn of Africa. And to help us unpack the story, we are joined by Al Jazeera English digital journalist Faisal Ali, who's joining us from Mogadishu. Faisal, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views.
Salila, it's a pleasure to be back on again.
Pleasure is all ours. I want to jump right into it. For our listeners unfamiliar with Somaliland, can you briefly just explain its unique political status and why international recognition remains such a contentious issue for them?
Salila, as with most conflicts in Africa, kind of goes back to the colonial days. Somalia was divided among three European colonial powers, and Ethiopia, basically. And so the territory that Somaliland currently claims was ruled by the United Kingdom until 1960. And the core basis of the claim for Somaliland's independence from Somalia was that for 5 days before the rest of Somalia became independent from Italian colonial rule, Somaliland was operating basically as an independent state. At that time, historians are kind of jousting about the meaning of everything. But at that time, the intention was for the British territory to be merged into the former Italian territory to form a new republic. There were many questions unresolved. It was kind of done very hastily at the time. And over time, it led to grievances in the north, in the current Somaliland region, of a lack of inclusion and not having a fair stake in the larger new republic. But the core point that a lot of Somaliland's advocates and people who believe in the project keep pointing to is that during an armed rebellion in the north against the military dictator Mohammed Siad Barre, who ruled Somalia as a whole for around 30 years, he bombarded Somaliland's two largest cities in the north, Bur'o and Hargeisa, and tens of thousands of people were killed directly and indirectly as a result of the government's activities. And that kind of set Somaliland very strongly on a new political path towards, as they say, reclaiming their independence and separating from Somalia, which at that time descended basically into a civil war from which it never emerged for around 2 decades. I think you guys probably know about Somalia's woes. We're still trying to figure out exactly how the government work and everything like that. And so I think that was a forbidding experience for a lot of Somalilanders. And I think some of the dysfunction in the Somali government in Mogadishu, the Somali capital, has basically empowered that case. You know, they often say, why would we want to be part of a country where there's an armed insurgency, there are several governance challenges, interlocking governance challenges, and those kinds of things. I think the one core caveat I'd probably add is that at present, Somaliland doesn't actually control the entire territory of the former British protectorate. And so the eastern regions have opted to remain a part of Somalia, more attached to Somalia's symbols and its story, despite its issues. And then the northwestern region, Hargeisa, the two largest cities, Hargeisa, Bur'o, and Berbera, the core strategic city along the Gulf of Aden coast, which we'll probably be discussing, are under the control of the Somaliland administration. And so that's basically, if I give you guys a kind of potted history, that's the picture.
No, Thank you for that, because I think it's very, very critical to my second question now. Israel's recognition of Somaliland. It has become quite a significant geopolitical development, but why is that? Why does it matter, not only for Somaliland, but for the Horn of Africa and ultimately the entire continent?
For Somaliland specifically, for 35 years, Salelo, they were kind of campaigning energetically, almost in any capital, anybody who would listen to them, to recognize their independence from Somalia. They also engaged in numerous talks which failed and broke down with the Somali government in Mogadishu. At the time, the government basically wasn't ready to resolve bigger existential questions. As I was saying, we're still kind of forming, and the exact terms of the types of conversations that they should be having were not clear. As you said, there is a politics of recognition. Somaliland is saying we're an independent state. Mogadishu says you're a part of Somalia and we're trying to negotiate how to bring you back into the project. There's a kind of a fundamental difference there. If we kind of zoom out for what this means for the Horn of Africa, basically over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of extra regional powers have moved to establish either a military presence or a naval presence in Djibouti, which is the main kind of site for anybody who wants to kind of set up shop in this region. Just for the audience's benefit, a large part of global trade passes through the Bab el-Mandeb, which is a small strait between Yemen and Djibouti, and then through the Red Sea onto Europe. This small narrow waterway basically connects Europe, one of the wealthiest parts of the world, to the Gulf, and then onto South Asia and East Asia, where you have some of the most dynamic economies. And so it's just a very important place, basically. And a lot of people don't want to take chances and want to have a physical presence in order to ensure that there are minimal disruptions. In addition to having all of that trade passing through, it's also an insecure place. So there's a civil war in Yemen, there's a civil war in Sudan. Somalia, obviously, has been in a very difficult situation for close to 30 years. And so that adds urgency to that question. Israel basically is a latecomer to the region, if you kind of look at it from a historical perspective. Turkey is present, obviously. The United States and China have bases in Djibouti. Egypt and Saudi Arabia increasingly deepening their relationship with the Somali government in Mogadishu. And so I think I'd say probably due to the conflict that the Israelis had with the Houthis over the course of the Gaza genocide, that probably alerted policymakers over there to the importance of this region and why they probably need to have a good relationship to some of the actors. And the only one that emerged as somebody, as a country or a state rather, keen to explore a relationship with Israel was Somaliland. One of the key things that came out of this, Salelo, though, I'll say, is that Israel Katz, the defense minister of Israel, during a joint meeting with the Somaliland president, who's had like pomp and pageantry and has basically met the entire leadership over there over the course of the last 4 or 5 days. He said that the cooperation with Somaliland on security issues actually goes much further back to the recognition, which surprised a lot of people. And he said it's going to go to new heights as well. And so we're not sure what all of that means. We're going to try and find out. But that's that's the local picture, and that's the broader international picture in this region.
You mentioned something very, very important. The fact that Israel is almost, a late comer into the party, of having some sort of presence within that region, the region of the Horn of Africa. But having a presence on the African continent, I think, is something that we saw Israel, at least in the last 5 years, trying to expand a bit further on the African continent. I mean, they've had state visits to Kenya and Zambia, if I'm not mistaken, and other parts of the continent. Why is that? Why is there this sudden urge for Israel to try and be present on the African continent, and what do they stand to gain?
Israel has a long and really complicated history in terms of its engagements with Africa in general, right? So in the post-colonial period, Golda Meir, one of the former Israeli prime ministers, made that really core part of Israel's foreign policy. She thought that if you have the support of African countries, it will kind of blunt the voting impact of Arab states and states aligned with Palestine in the UN General Assembly, and then fewer resolutions will pass condemning Israel for this or that, and loads have gone through the UN because of those issues. The wars that Israel had with Egypt shifted the balance because of really energetic diplomacy and energy diplomacy by Saudi Arabia and Egypt, which persuaded a lot of countries in Africa to align more closely with the Arab countries on this issue. And so over the course of, I think, the second half of the 20th century, Israel became quite an isolated player
Yeah.
in large parts of Africa, mainly kind of like discreet covert engagements, but nothing like very overt. I think in South Africa, obviously, that was one of the few places where they had a holdout until the government changed when apartheid began breaking down and falling apart. The sudden interest, I would probably say, is the fact that a lot of countries which have quite bad relationships with Israel at the moment have invested very heavily in developing their own relationships with Sudan, with Ethiopia, with Somalia. And then the second urgent development, I think, is this conflict with the Houthis. And so Israel basically had to travel like 2,000 kilometers in order to strike targets. The Houthis obviously have thrown volleys of missiles and drones and hitting everything from Israel's international airport to closing the port of Eilat as a result of their blockade of the Red Sea. And my guess, I mean, they haven't officially kind of explained some of their rationale, but a lot of their analysts and their academics and the work that they're publishing outlining some of the thinking is that they want to have a presence on that position, either for intelligence collection purposes against some of their opponents, or alternatively, which is the bigger picture, is that they use this development as a pretext, basically, to have a presence on the Red Sea, which they wanted anyway at the southern end.
So Somalia obviously has strongly opposed Israel's recognition of Somaliland. Can you maybe just give us an expanded reaction? You know how the news have been received in Mogadishu.
Somalia's government basically is at the moment locked in a major political and constitutional crisis, which is to some extent distracting the government's attention, and it's had that kind of security impact. There was fighting in Mogadishu about a week and a half ago between some of the opposition figures in the government, but for the most part, the Somali government's consistent messaging has been that it condemns Israel's engagements, which with any part of what it says is Somalia, of course, because it doesn't recognize Somaliland's declaration of independence. And then I know that it's been engaging its Arab League partners. Somalia is a member state of the Arab League and also the broader Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where both bodies have released statements. One of the core concerns for those countries as well in the Arab League is that Somaliland has decided, Salelo, to open its embassy to Israel in Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv, which breaks with the convention of the majority of foreign missions, because Israel obviously exclusively claims Jerusalem, which is a disputed city. And if you place your embassy there, you're basically endorsing Israel's claim. But 8 countries, I think, including Somaliland, now have the embassies in Jerusalem, including 2 Muslim majority countries. So that would be Somaliland and Kosovo. And then Kosovo obviously has its own kind of complicated recognition politics because it's not a UN member state, but is widely recognized by a lot of countries in the international community. And so their reaction obviously has been fury. They're not happy about it. There have been columns obviously appearing in Middle Eastern papers about what the implications and meaning of this is, and all governments in the region have released either a joint statement with the Somali government or independently released some of their own statements reacting to some of this. More broadly, the Houthis and Hamas have also released their own statements giving their views about what's going on between Somaliland and Israel, and of course condemned what's going on there. So that's the, if you want, the kind of vibe check of the region. That's how everybody feels about it.
I have a digital journalist at Al Jazeera English, Faisal Ali. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure having you on Salam Media and for unpacking, I think, what is becoming a very, very interesting development in the Horn of Africa. Hope we chat again soon.
Always a pleasure. Take care, Salelo. Bye-bye.
There we go. And with that, we've come to the end of today's edition of our #Africa Focus feature. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.
Soweto, it's time to stand together for justice, peace, and solidarity. Join us for the annual Soweto Walk for Gaza, taking place on Saturday, the 20th of June at 7:30 a.m. The walk will begin at the historic Regina Mundi Church and proceed to the monumentous Dlamini Mosque, bringing together people of all faiths, backgrounds, and communities in a powerful show of unity and support. Bring your family, friends, and fellow residents as we walk together for a common cause. Let your voice be heard and your presence counted. That's the annual Soweto Walk for Gaza, Saturday, the 20th of June at 7:30 in the morning, starting at Regina Mundi Church and ending at Dlamini Mosque. Together we walk, together we stand, together we show solidarity.